In a locked vault at Yale University lies a book that refuses to surrender its secrets. For over a century, brilliant minds have tried to decode it and failed. Its language is unknown, its plants unreal, and its meaning hidden, suggesting a mystery far stranger than anything we have ever imagined. In 1912, a Polish book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich walked into the Villa Mondragone outside Rome, searching through collections the Jesuit order had decided to sell. Among forgotten manuscripts and dusty volumes, he found something that would consume the rest of his life. The book was small, roughly 6 inches by 9 inches, bound in worn vellum. Its pages were filled with text written in an alphabet no one had ever seen. Every margin bloomed with illustrations, plants drawn in meticulous detail, astronomical charts that resembled nothing in recorded science, human figures immersed in strange networks of tubes and pools. Voynich understood immediately that he was holding something unprecedented. He did not know he had found a mystery that would outlive him by generations, still unsolved, still defiant. The manuscript contains roughly 240 pages. Though scholars believe some sections are missing, it is divided into what appear to be distinct sections based on the illustrations. The first and largest section shows botanical drawings, root systems, leaves, flowers, rendered with careful attention to structure. But here's where certainty ends. Not one of these plants has ever been identified. Botanists have spent decades comparing the illustrations against every known species, living and extinct. They have searched through medieval herbals, pharmaceutical texts, early scientific compendiums. The plants in the Voynich manuscript do not exist. They resemble real vegetation closely enough to suggest knowledge of plant anatomy, but diverge in ways that place them outside biological reality. Some appear to be composites, as if someone took parts of different species and assembled them into something new. Others display features that belong to no classification system ever devised. The second major section contains astronomical and astrological imagery. There are circular diagrams filled with what might be stars or symbols. Some pages show structures that resemble observational charts with concentric rings and radiating lines. Zodiac-like figures appear, but they are distorted, wrong. The constellations do not match anything in European, Arabic, or Asian astronomical traditions. One diagram shows what might be a cosmological map, with a central sphere surrounded by layers of smaller elements. Modern astronomers have tried to identify the celestial objects depicted. They have found nothing that corresponds. It is as if the manuscript describes a sky observed from nowhere on Earth. Then comes the biological section, and here the strangeness deepens. Dozens of small human figures, all female and all naked, are shown immersed in networks of interconnected pools and tubes. Green or blue liquid flows through these systems. The figures are drawn in a simplified style, almost childlike, yet the network itself is rendered with systematic precision. Some scholars have suggested it represents bathing practices, others medicinal procedures, still others something symbolic or allegorical. But the configurations do not match any known medieval representation of anatomy, hydrology, or cosmology. The liquid network loops and branches in ways that suggest intentional design, but its purpose remains invisible. Following this are pages that appear pharmaceutical in nature, small drawings of plant parts, roots, and vessels, accompanied by short blocks of text. These resemble the format of medieval medical recipes, yet the plants depicted are again unidentifiable. The final section abandons illustrations almost entirely. Page after page contains only text, written in the same flowing script that fills every other section. The handwriting is confident, unbroken. There are almost no corrections, no crossed-out words, no visible signs of hesitation. Whoever wrote this did so with fluency, as if transcribing something already fully formed. Voynich knew the manuscript was old, but he could not have known how old. In his possession was a letter, still attached to the book, written in 1666 by Johannes Marcus Marci, a physician at the University of Prague. The letter was addressed to Athanasius Kircher, a Jesuit, scholar in Rome renowned for his attempts to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs. Marci wrote that the manuscript had once belonged to Rudolf II, Holy Roman Emperor, who had purchased it for 600 ducats, an enormous sum equivalent to several years of a skilled craftsman's wages. Rudolf believed the book to be the work of Roger Bacon, the 13th century English philosopher and proto-scientist. Marci was sending the manuscript to Kircher in the hope that he, with his knowledge of obscure languages, might finally decode it. There is no record that Kircher ever succeeded. The manuscript vanished from history until Voynich rediscovered it 2.5 centuries later. The Roger Bacon theory held appeal. Bacon was known for his interest in codes, optics, and alchemy. He wrote in cipher and hid knowledge in layers of meaning. But the theory collapsed under scrutiny. Radiocarbon dating performed on the vellum in 2009 placed the manuscript's creation between 1404 and 1438. Roger Bacon died in 1292. The book was made more than a century after his death. The ink, analyzed separately, matched the same period. Whoever created the Voynich Manuscript did so in the early 1500s, in an era when the Renaissance was rewriting European knowledge, when printing presses were spreading information faster than ever before. And yet someone chose to write this text by hand, in a script no one else could read, filled with images no one could interpret. Some theorists turn to Leonardo da Vinci. The timeline fit. Leonardo was alive during the manuscript's creation. He was obsessed with codes, mirror writing, hidden knowledge. His notebooks overflow with botanical studies, anatomical diagrams, hydraulic systems. The biological section of the manuscript, with its networks of tubes and flowing liquid, resembles Leonardo's fascination with circulation and flow. But the style is wrong. Leonardo's drawings are precise, almost technical. The Voynich illustrations are softer, less controlled. The handwriting bears no resemblance to Leonardo's distinctive mirror script, and there is no evidence Leonardo ever traveled to the regions where the manuscript first appeared. The theory, like Bacon's, dissolved into speculation. The question of language became central. If this was a cipher, it was unlike any cipher known to medieval or Renaissance cryptography. Ciphers are designed to obscure meaning while retaining the structure of the underlying language. They substitute letters or rearrange them, but the patterns of the original language remain detectable. The Voynich text shows none of this. Its words follow statistical patterns found in natural languages. It obeys something called Zipf's law, a linguistic principle stating that in any language, the most common word appears roughly twice as often as the second most common, 3 times as often as the third, and so on. The Voynich manuscript follows this distribution. It also exhibits patterns of word frequency, sentence length variation, and contextual clustering that match organic language, not artificial code. William Friedman, the American cryptographer who broke Japan's purple cipher during World War II, spent decades studying the manuscript. He assembled teams of analysts, applied every known method of cryptanalysis, and found nothing. The National Security Agency examined it. Supercomputers ran pattern recognition algorithms. Artificial intelligence systems trained on hundreds of languages attempted decryption. All failed. The text behaves like language but refuses to translate. It contains what researchers call ghost words, terms that appear only once or twice in the entire manuscript, breaking the repetition patterns that should exist in any real language. Some sections seem to be written in what scholars term Courier A and Courier B, 2 distinct dialects or hands with slightly different statistical fingerprints. The transition between them is seamless, suggesting a single author fluent in both, or a system designed with internal variation. One detail emerged from art historical analysis. Several illustrations in the manuscript show architectural features, castles, towers, fortifications. Some of these structures display swallowtail battlements, a crenellation style specific to northern Italy, particularly the Veneto region during the 15th century. This matched the radiocarbon dating and suggested a geographic origin, but it also deepened the mystery. Northern Italy in the early 1400s was one of the most literate regions in Europe. Universities flourished. Libraries preserved classical texts. Scholars corresponded across borders. Why would someone in this intellectually vibrant environment create a book in an unknown language filled with imaginary plants and unidentifiable diagrams? The hoax theory gained traction. Perhaps the manuscript was always meaningless, a fabrication designed to deceive. The cardon grill method, a Renaissance encryption technique using a template with cutout windows, was proposed as a possible construction tool. A forger could have placed the grill over blank pages, filled the visible spaces with nonsense syllables, then shifted the grill and repeated the process, creating text that looked structured but conveyed nothing. Yet this theory struggles against the manuscript's internal consistency. The vocabulary remains stable across hundreds of pages. Words recur in contextually appropriate ways. The illustrations, while strange, are drawn with too much care and knowledge to be pure invention. A hoaxer working in the early 1500s would have needed profound botanical and astronomical knowledge simply to create plausible-looking errors. Then there is the writing itself. Modern forensic analysis of the handwriting reveals something unsettling. The strokes are smooth, rhythmic, confident. There are almost no corrections. The pen never hesitates. This is not the work of someone laboriously constructing a cipher or executing a forgery. This is fluent writing. The author was not encoding known text into unknown symbols. They were writing in the unknown script as if it were their natural language. Either they had internalized an artificial system so completely that it became second nature, or they were writing in a language they knew, one that simply no longer exists in any other record. Some researchers have suggested the manuscript represents a lost language, perhaps from a culture that left no other trace. This theory borders on the fantastical, but it is not impossible. Languages disappear, entire writing systems vanish. Linear A, the script of Minoan and Crete, remains undeciphered. The Indus Valley script resists all translation, but those systems left behind vast archaeological records. The Voynich manuscript stands alone, If it records a lost language, that language belonged to a culture so isolated, so completely erased, that nothing else of their world survived. Not a single comparable text, not a fragment of pottery bearing the same script, not a reference in any neighboring society's records. Others have proposed it might be an artificial language, a constructed system created for philosophical or mystical purposes. The Renaissance saw experiments in universal languages, attempts to build communication systems based on logic rather than historical accident. But those experiments came later, in the 17th century, and they left extensive documentation explaining their principles. The Voynich Manuscript offers no such guide. If it is an artificial language, its creator took the secret to the grave, leaving behind only this single encoded book. The botanical section haunts researchers most persistently. The plants are drawn with knowledge. Root structures, leaf arrangements, flower symmetries, these details follow biological logic, yet the combinations are wrong. One illustration shows a plant with a root system resembling a radish, leaves similar to a water lily, and flowers like nothing in the botanical record. Another displays what might be a sunflower head attached to a stem covered in structures resembling seed pods from an entirely different family. These are not random doodles. They are systematic impossibilities, as if someone understood plant morphology well enough to invent species that could not exist but almost should. Astronomers examining the celestial diagrams have noted something equally disturbing. Some of the circular charts contain structures that resemble spiral galaxies, patterns not visible to the naked eye and not described in Western astronomy until the 20th century. This is almost certainly coincidence. The human mind's tendency to find familiar shapes in ambiguity. But it adds to the manuscript's aura of wrongness, the sense that it knows things it should not know. The manuscript now resides in the Voynich Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University, preserved in climate-controlled storage, digitized and made available online. Anyone can examine its pages. Tens of thousands have tried. Amateur cryptographers, professional linguists, computer scientists, mystics, conspiracy theorists, all have brought their methods and their certainty. None have broken it. The manuscript absorbs their theories and remains unchanged. Recent computational approaches have grown more sophisticated. Machine learning algorithms trained on pattern recognition have identified statistical regularities in the text, but these regularities lead nowhere. They confirm that the manuscript follows linguistic rules, but they cannot identify which rules or what language. Artificial intelligence, fed the entire corpus of medieval and Renaissance texts, finds no matches, no cognates, no structural parallels. The manuscript exists in informational isolation. What remains is not merely an unsolved puzzle. It is something stranger. A book written with complete fluency in a system that appears nowhere else in human history. Images drawn with enough knowledge to be almost real but distorted in ways that prevent identification. A text that obeys the laws of language while refusing to mean anything we can understand. It was created at immense effort. Vellum was expensive. The illustrations required skill and time. The writing flowed across hundreds of pages without error. Someone invested months, perhaps years, into this object. For what purpose? To deceive? Then why make it so internally consistent? To preserve knowledge? Then why make it unreadable? To communicate? Then why invent a language no one else could learn? Perhaps the question itself is wrong. Perhaps the manuscript is not hiding something. Perhaps it is the hiding, a physical embodiment of knowledge placed deliberately beyond reach. Not to protect it, but to demonstrate that some things can exist in plain sight and still remain utterly inaccessible. It sits in a library. Anyone can see it. No one can read it. It is simultaneously public and secret, shared and isolated, exposed and protected. The Voynich Manuscript may be the most honest book ever written. It does not pretend to offer answers. It does not promise revelation. It simply exists, a reminder that understanding is not guaranteed, that meaning is not universal, that we can hold something in our hands and still know nothing about it, in an age that believes every mystery will eventually yield to analysis, that computation and data will unlock all secrets. The manuscript remains untouched. It has outlasted empires, survived wars, passed through dozens of hands, and resisted every method we have invented to force it open. What it is hiding may not be information. It may be something more fundamental, the limits of knowledge itself. The possibility that some things were never meant to be understood, or were meant only for eyes that no longer exist, or were created precisely to be this, eternal, beautiful, and silent. The manuscript does not owe us its meaning. It never promised to make sense. And in its refusal, in its perfect, maddening coherence, that leads to nothing, it may be showing us the only truth that matters. That mystery is not always a puzzle waiting to be solved. Sometimes it is simply what remains when everything else has been stripped away, and sometimes that is enough.